Welcome to the Healer's Choice. We continue our story. The Belle of Truth.
Parting ways with Ryej after convincing him to let her travel the rest of the way alone. Eirina ran clutching her purse. She wanted to avoid slowing at any cost, trying to avoid her purse being seen by anyone. She rounded a corner to the alley stairs, tucking her purse tightly between her breasts, just before bumping into a figure who was standing with two others at the base of the narrow landing. The person instinctively shoved Eirina to the cobblestone, dirtying her dress. When she looked up at them, she felt her flesh go cold. The man that had pushed her was tall while the other two were stocky, but what made her shudder in fear was that they all had the telltale ruddy nose and necks of ruby lace users. These were the type of men to pilfer goods from the market. They all looked her over once, and immediately their eyes glittered with twisted intentions. The one in the center of the group that she had bumped into gave a wide grin with 3 missing teeth. The thug leaned forward.
"Where you heading, little daisy?"
Eirina skittered back on her palms to get back up to her feet and up the steps behind her. The man to her right slinked past the one in front of her, cornering her to a wall.
Got your tongue.
He put his hand on her neck. Eirina's heart was pounding in her chest. She'd been in many situations like this before, but it was always difficult to tell if any of them were armed. His thumb pressed into her neck.
Come on, say so. Oh!
Eirina kicked her leg up, the point of her foot striking the man's groin. He let go of her neck and started immediately vomiting and drooling, a side effect of ruby lace. Pain hits you just as hard as the pleasure. She broke away and started backing to the edge of the burrow, where Ryej had just seen her off. However, the other 2 thugs were hot on her heels. By her awkward gait, it was clear that she was no longer used to such large skirts, making it easier for the thugs to catch up to her. She had nearly made it back to the thoroughfare when she was tugged down a side street and tossed to the ground. She tried to get to her feet and was kicked from behind.
"Stay down, bitch!"
Another kick hit her in the side, and she let out a heavy groan of pain. She curled up into a ball, protecting her chest, and in turn, her coin purse. They continued to kick and yell obscenities at her until she heard a thud, and then several sharp cries. She looked up from beyond her curled body and saw in the dimming sunlight, through the pink smog, a man brandishing a blade at both the thugs.
"This is my mark now. Get out of here before I cut more than just your fingers."
Eirina then noticed that the main thug was clutching his hand, blood pouring between his fingers. The thugs rushed off, cursing loudly at the man as they went, an ebony dog skull slowly facing her. Eirina's brows lowered in pain before shock and anger registered on her face, and she shot to her feet. As she jumped back up, the jingle of coin sounded from within her dress. The masked man looked her over, not seeing a coin purse at her waist.
"Are you all right?"
The question made Eirina look at the man warily.
I've had worse.
The masked man raised a brow at that.
"A finely dressed woman like yourself shouldn't be wandering the afternoon hours in the burrows, much less at any time. You should go home before something worse comes your way."
And I'm to believe you stepped in because you're a gentleman?
"And if I said yes?"
Eirina scoffed as she backed up a few steps.
Then I'd be inclined to call you a liar.
The man's eyes scrutinized Eirina.
"I've not seen you before, but you act as if you know me. I presume we've met?"
The thief stepped closer as Eirina kept the same pace of distance between them.
No, I don't know you.
"Is that so?"
Another step forward as Eirina took another step back.
It was at the apothecary in the Steel District. The owner told me about a dog-masked man that stole his earnings.
A high-class woman with a Glades accent is going to an apothecary in the Steel District.
Eirina went silent as he took another step towards her. This time, as she took a step back, she found herself against a wall. She looked from the wall to the masked thief. Her entire body ached from the forming bruises on her sides, but she held tense as the thief's gray eyes probed her. He stepped closer, his eyes showing a smile growing from behind the mask.
Clever girl. Had you said nothing to me, I would have thought you just a curious Glades girl.
Eirina furrowed her brows before her cheeks turned pale at the sight of the blade in the thief's hand, still dripping with a fine line of blood. The man shifted, moving slightly to her left, as he leaned onto one leg to replace his dagger to its sheath. It was at that moment Eirina rushed forward in an attempt to get out of the dead street. However, it was a desperate attempt. It didn't take long for him to turn and grab her by her arms, bringing her close, her back against his chest.
Seems you took my advice and cleaned up.
Eirina's face gave a sudden flash of anger, ripping an arm free from his grasp. Turning, she slashed her hand out, trying to hit anything she could while the sound of coin jingled again. Her nails scraped across his neck, meeting with air soon after. She attempted to pull her other arm free while the thief dealt with the sudden flash of pain, but ultimately her attack made him grip her arm tighter. He took her free arm by the wrists, a smile in his voice as he spoke.
Seems you grew a spine as well, or did it offend you that what I said was the truth?
He looked at Eirina's chest.
You know, this will be a first time for me.
Pig.
You chose to hide your coin there, and it was you that callously pointed out.
He pressed her against the wall, pulling a different dagger from his hip.
I'm not a gentleman.
Eirina felt her entire body tremble.
But I do have standards.
He took one of Eirina's hands and put it over her chest.
Now, to business.
Eirina cursed under her breath and reached into her dress. However, the masked man held his eyes on Eirina's rather than ogling her struggle. Eirina thrust her right knee into the thief's groin. His dagger arm buckled, and she managed to push him back from her. But unlike the thugs, the thief only huffed out a breath before gripping Eirina by her bruised sides. He thrust her to the ground, wrestling her onto her back. She kicked and fought with all she could muster, but the thief was strong and weighed more than her. He breathed out the words as he stared down at her.
You certainly are desperate. Make this easier on yourself and just keep still.
Why should I keep still any longer?
Eirina shouted into the thief's face.
I live in a hole in the ground. I have 6 mouths to feed. One is so sick he can't even open his eyes.
Eirina's muscles started to give, but she kept fighting.
Why does the city have to make those children suffer so much?
Eirina closed her eyes, tears streaking from her face, her arms trembling as she desperately tried to push the thief off.
I work so hard to make them go through life untroubled. But people like you try and walk all over me. Not anymore.
She opened her eyes, staring daggers at the thief.
I'll fight. I'll run. I'll do anything to keep what's mine, to make those children smile again. So if you or any of the other bastards in this city want what I've earned, you better kill me for it.
She could see the thief's eyes through the darkness of his mask. They were wide with shock. Then, as quick as the shock came, it left and was replaced by a piteous stare. He nearly spoke, but cut himself off, trying his best not to speak at all before grumbling out a curse.
Shit!
A groan of frustration came from him as he pulled back from Eirina. He put a knee on her stomach, then using his dagger, he ripped open the top of her bodice. Using the tip of the blade, he knocked the purse free and several silver and gold pieces fell from it. He stood up from her and snatched up the purse.
Understand, it's as I told the old gnome. I don't get to be picky about who I take money from, but I'm not into killing for money.
He gestured in the direction the thugs had gone.
Leave that to the amateurs and the mercenaries.
He backed away from Eirina as he gave another groan.
As much as your sob story hit a chord, I need the damned money.
He lifted the purse now wrapped to his wrists. Eirina sat up slowly, her body shaking as she tightly clutched her open bodice. He walked away from her towards the slowly darkening district.
It's just business.
It took time and a lot of hiding around corners, but eventually, Eirina made it to the sleepless moon. The entire place was lively, and unlike last time, it seemed as though everyone had settled on their partners for the night. There were ladies and men dressed in fine sheer silk, pouring drinks and seductively tracing fingers over patrons. Eirina's eyes gave wary glances as she pulled her bodice tightly closed. She saw a dwarf behind the main bar, handing out bottles to the workers, and approached. He was smoking something that smelled like the bellows.
Can I help you?
I'm looking for Lydia.
Who?
Oh, right. I'm looking for Luna.
The dwarf looked around. His smoking roll twitched as he grimaced.
Luna might be with a customer. You'll be waiting a while before you can see her. Could I interest you in another of the girls? If that's your preference.
No, I'm just here for Luna.
The dwarf's head rolled back a little to get a better view of Eirina's face, smoke trailing into Eirina's nose as he moved. She pulled back from the bar to give a short cough when the dwarf spoke again.
Your family?
Of sorts.
The dwarf gave a pause.
How much do you have on you?
Eirina's eyes went wide. Turning her body slightly, she pulled out the last of the silver the thief had left behind when stealing her purse. She held them out in her palm, and the dwarf's roll slid between his lips as he gave a tight frown, then looked back up at Eirina, heaving a heavy sigh before opening a wide book to his right and flipping to a half-filled page.
You're in luck. The guy in to see Luna paid for no favors.
The dwarf took her coin and stashed it in the book.
Basically, it's a cuddle session. Feel free to go on up.
Eirina's body tensed, her stomach dancing nervously.
I can wait.
She's got a long list of customers for the night.
The dwarf poked the book to his right.
This is as good a chance you're going to get if you plan to talk to her.
The color in Eirina's cheeks became sallow as she made her way towards the stairs. The dwarf was now attending to other customers as Eirina looked back at him, biting her lip. She turned to face the stairs. Scantily clad men and women made their way past her as she ascended. When she reached the fourth door, she reached out to knock, but the sound of glass shattering made Eirina's heart jump. She could hear voices from beyond the door.
Lydia, you need to sit. Your hands are shaking.
Her turning stomach dropped entirely as she rushed through the door, her face filled with worry. However, the scene before her was calm. Dia was cleaning up a puddle of tea from the floor, while an elven man swept glass shards into their hardened hands. It was Ryej, his calm eyes turning to face Eirina as Dia's head also perked up to look at her. Dia looked so pale compared to when Eirina had visited earlier in the day. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as though she had been crying, and just as Ryej had said, Dia's hands were trembling. However, Eirina's panicked expression and heavy breath made both Dia and Ryej abandon their cleaning.
Eirina? By the gods, what happened to you?
Eirina looked from Dia to the front of her dress. It was slashed and hanging off her like jagged paper. She tucked her arms around her chest, ears red as she looked from Dia to the elven man. Dia rushed to Eirina's side and sat her on the sofa.
Excuse me, Ryej. Let me introduce you to my... We've met.
Eirina looked at Ryej, her panic barely having subsided. She quickly turned her attention onto Dia, putting a hand on her forehead.
You look so pale. Are you all right? Do you have a fever?
Dia's skin was cool beneath Eirina's palm, which Dia removed with a scoff, while Ryej emptied the porcelain in his hands into a bin.
You look a mess, and my fatigue has you worried? You're trembling and...
Dia grasped Eirina's shoulders gently.
I'm fine, Mama. Just having to take on a lot more work than usual, that's all.
Eirina had a look of concern just as Ryej faced the woman, his eyes focusing on Eirina.
Were you hurt?
Eirina grimaced and looked away from the commander, embarrassment on her face as she hung her eyes.
You weren't hurt, were you?
Eirina lied by shaking her head. Dia scowled.
Don't lie to me, Mama. The dress I gave you is torn wide open.
She perhaps doesn't feel comfortable talking while I am here.
Ryej started to move towards the door, but Dia stopped him, her hands out toward him and her eyes filled with worry.
Please, stay. You can help her, can't you?
Ryej looked at Dia with a softening expression and nodded. He stood aside as Dia immediately began to look Eirina over.
What happened? I was knocked down. A few bruises at the most. It truly isn't that serious, Dia.
Dia's brows lowered, and then she hugged Eirina gently.
Though I'm sorry about your dress. Don't be silly. The dress hardly matters.
She parted from Eirina to look her in the eyes.
I'll get you something to change into, okay? Something a bit less noticeable.
She looked over towards Ryej, who gave a nod before approaching. Dia stepped away towards her wardrobe, but Eirina gripped her wrists as she became rigid, watching Ryej's approach. She could only hold her tension for so long before her sides ached horribly. Dia gave her a soft look, touching her hand and giving her reassurance.
He's not as cold as he appears. Let him help you, please.
Ryej's icy eyes followed Eirina as she trembled terribly. Carefully, Ryej put out a hand towards the scared woman, not taking his eyes off her face.
This will only take a moment.
Eirina watched as he closed his eyes, his hand finding her shoulder as his face fell gently. Her shoulder grew warm and there was light in her peripheral. She looked at the commander's hand and her eyes widened in shock. Ryej's hand was alight with magic, glittering white and gold like dust in the air, tracing over Eirina in a slow, swirling motion. As he had said, it only took a moment before the light dissipated. Ryej opened his eyes, looking at Eirina, his features gentle.
Do you feel any lingering pain?
Eirina moved further onto the sofa, but her motions elicited no pain.
You're a healer?
Ryej shook his head.
I'm no healer. It was the Duke that insisted I learn some magic from Wizard Hyphel.
Eirina stood up, her eyes locked onto Ryej's.
You know Wizard Hyphel?
Dia was holding a gray dress as she sat on the sofa, just as Ryej went to the tufted seat adjacent to the woman. Eirina stood for a moment, before Dia reached across, shaking her arm.
Please sit down.
Eirina did sit. She sat still staring at Ryej, then turned to Dia.
Was that why you said he could help? Because of Paul?
Dia opened her mouth to speak when Ryej placed a hand on the table.
Miss Eirina.
Eirina faced the commander as he gave her a solemn look.
Dia rarely asks for a favor like this, so I was willing to help in this instance. But magic takes a toll. If you're looking to get my help for something more serious than this, I may ask you for a favor in kind.
Eirina sat up straighter, her now wary attention on Ryej.
Isn't that a bit hypocritical? You stepped in when I didn't wish to do favors to a man, and now you're asking for the same?
Ryej grimaced.
Don't place your preconceptions over my intentions, Miss Eirina. I'm offering you help in exchange for actual work.
Eirina went wide-eyed, and Dia stiffened, her eyes tracing Ryej's face. Ryej noticed Dia's expression and gave her a shake of his head. Eirina caught the tension between the two, and how immediately Dia relaxed at the small gesture Ryej had given.
What kind of work?
Ryej leaned back in his seat.
I'm sure you're aware of the upcoming ball.
Eirina nodded, not adding anything by mouth, since that was all she had heard.
Elven dignitaries of the Empire are coming to visit the Grand Duke in celebration of an entire year of successful trade, policy, and market. I would like for you to be part of the guest entertainment, the main act in singing for the lunar aria.
Eirina's body flinched, her face went slack.
Dia did tell me that several of the children you care for are ill. I could take them to Hyphel for treatment as part of this agreement, as well as offer you room and board for your entire family.
That is generous. But is it not the Grand Duke that gives the final word on such things? It is his ball, after all.
Ryej gave a soft smile.
I would hardly worry about that. The Duke and I are on quite close terms.
Eirina looked at Dia, who just gave her a smile and a shrug.
This may be the best way to get the children out of the burrows. Yes, but...
Her eyes glanced towards Ryej, her face showing concern.
From our earlier interactions and in my time with Dia, I understand that you and your family hold little trust in the authority of this city.
Ryej held his gentle expression.
But I give you my word that I intend to only assist you.
Dia put a hand on Eirina's shoulder, whispering toward her.
I wouldn't trust just anybody, Mama. Especially now with my family.
Eirina grimaced and looked back toward Ryej.
Let me tell the children. Prepare them for all of this before I make a decision.
Ryej gave Eirina a nod.
I will be sure to escort you to your home properly this time.
Eirina looked at the floor with embarrassment.
I didn't want to show you where I live.
Ryej gave a shake of his head.
To protect your children. I understand. I am partly to blame for not insisting on escorting you. This time I will not make the same mistake.
He gestured towards Dia.
I will wait outside for you. Please take your time getting dressed.
He started for the door and Dia got to her feet.
Hey, Ryej?
The commander turned back as Dia stood at his side, whispering.
I'll write everything down for you. Tomorrow it should be ready.
Ryej's brow lowered as he gave Dia a nod.
Thank you.
Ryej stepped out of the room, and Dia let her shoulders slump as she released a sigh. Dia looked like something had washed the color from her cheeks. Her brow was furrowed in frustration, and she was biting at her thumbnail.
What's wrong?
Dia looked at Eirina as she started back towards the sofa.
You're biting your thumb. You always did that when you were in trouble.
Dia smiled as she relinquished her thumb.
It's a terrible habit I haven't grown out of, huh?
Dia sat beside Eirina, giving her a reassuring look, and patted her hand.
You're not in any kind of trouble, are you? I live in Ruby Town. There are a lot of dangers here.
There was a sarcastic tone to her voice, and when she looked to see Eirina unamused, she softened.
But I'm fine. Just repaying Ryej with hard work of my own.
Eirina watched as Dia leaned an elbow on the arm of her lounge sofa.
He's been quite good to me, even teaching me to write so I can learn archivist work.
Eirina blinked owlishly.
Are you looking to become an archivist?
Dia held from speaking for a long moment.
I like to learn things. It's almost like playing cards. If you know something no one else does, it gives you the upper hand.
Dia then grimaced.
Knowledge, I found, is the better form of strength. And I don't want to be manipulated again, or allow anyone else to be turned over as I had.
Eirina gripped Dia's hand tightly, conveying her support in the gesture rather than speaking aloud. Dia smiled before shifting Eirina to turn where she sat.
Now let's get this off you so you can get home to tell the children the good news.
Eirina held the torn bodice of her dress as Dia began to unlace it from behind.
This must have been quite the tussle. It could have been much worse if...
Eirina held her words, refusing to speak about the man in the dog mask.
If...
Eirina sighed.
Someone saved me. From several ruby lace users. Truly? Someone in the burrows helped you?
Eirina felt the dress tug from side to side as Dia fought with the dirty ties.
They don't seem to be from the burrows, and they didn't exactly help me as much as they helped themselves. Are they the reason your bodice is slit so neatly?
Eirina looked over her shoulder at Dia.
Yes. So let me guess. They helped you and finished what the others started?
Eirina turned to look ahead, away from Dia, telling her that she had hit the mark.
And who says that chivalry is dead in this city?
She said it sarcastically, but Eirina could hear the worry in her voice as she helped her remove the dress. Once they pulled it away, Dia held it out like a poisonous snake.
I guess we'll just burn this. Sorry. No more apologizing.
Dia scolded softly.
I'd rather be burning a dress than something having happened to you.
Dia tossed the dress aside and took up the gray gown she had gathered earlier.
I'm guessing you'll be needing some gowns for this ball. I haven't truly made up my mind on the matter.
Dia gave a smirk as she helped Eirina into the gray dress.
I can imagine Paul will be against it, but I truly believe that this is a great opportunity for you. Who knows? You may even find yourself a patron that'd be willing to pay you a steady stipend. Maybe you'll find a husband, too.
Eirina's face went bright pink.
Why would you bring up such things? Oh, Mama.
Dia looked at her like she was a newborn pup. Shaking her head, Dia pats down the gray dress. There was no lace, no accents, or embellishments. It was something that would fit quite well in the Burrows.
When you make your decision, come to me. You can use any of my gowns before you make your debut in high society.
Eirina could see the gentle smile on Dia's face and returned it with one of her own.
If I choose to take on this work, I'll be sure to ask Ryej that we get you out of here.
That made Dia's eyes widen.
We can all go make a new home together. All of us.
Dia's mouth opened like a dying fish, just as the door to Dia's room swung open and a cherry-faced drunk came swaggering in.
Luna, I'm back.
The man saw Dia and Eirina standing together and smiled widely at Eirina.
Luna, please introduce your friend.
Eirina's neck tightened as Dia took a step between her and the drunk.
You want me to introduce her?
Dia put her hand on his chest, trailing over his neck.
Am I not enough? That you look at my friend in such a way saddens me.
The man physically shivered as Dia's eyes bore into him, her lashes fluttering as her free hand gestured for Eirina to squeeze past. Eirina hung her head and moved past without issue. The man's attention was on Dia completely. His eyes were soft as he stared down at her, his hand drifting into Dia's hair.
Oh, don't be jealous, love. I'm here for you, and only you.
Eirina's neck tightened more as she tried to refrain from making a sound. She passed through the door and out of Dia's room. The sound of bodies pressing against the door. Eirina closed her eyes. Her lips made a thin line before her eyes moved down the hall, where she saw Ryej. He looked sick as he stared at the door behind Eirina's back, but when his eyes met hers, the stoicism came back into his expression. He waited patiently for her to step to his side, the sound of the inn making every step so quiet as she dragged her feet. When they were outside, she felt a chill run through her. She had no cloak again. Just as she began to shiver in the cold wind, Ryej, without a word, placed his capelet as he had before over her shoulders.
I apologize if I'm not much for conversation at the moment. My thoughts are taking my attention.
Eirina gave a nod of understanding before keeping a gentle pace at his side. Neither of them spoke, but both would glance back every so often towards the slowly disappearing, sleepless moon.